All right, welcome back, guys. I want to take some time to go over details. Okay, obviously, in this incident narrative, it's really important that we provide details for our reader. It makes an engaging story, it sets the scene, and it's just important to writing overall. But the question is, what to include, what to keep out, right? We want to give our readers as clear a picture as possible, but we also have a word count, and we also don't want to just drone on about something that doesn't matter. So let's take a look at an example. Let's start with a detail. So he wore blue Nike Vaporfly Max Air 180s with brown scuffs on them and red soles. Okay, so we know a lot, right? Describing a person, he wears blue Nikes, right? So they're blue. We know they have brown scuffs on them and they have red soles. We know what type of shoe it is. If we know the type of shoe, we can think about, we can picture it, right? So this is a lot of details, right? But are they good details, right? Is it functional, or is it just for show, right? Has all the stickers, has a spoiler, right? It's got side skirts, but it doesn't do anything. It's just a car dressed up, and it's dressed up and it's funny looking, right? It's kind of almost if you write something like this and there's no real point to it, then it ends up looking ridiculous like this, and readers will kind of scoff at it, right? So you got to ask yourself, the important question is, are the details I'm supplying, do they help? Do they help my reader? Do they help set the scene? Do they help the narrative along, right? So you got to ask that. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. So let's look at if we change it a little bit. Jimmy always wore blue Nike Vaporfly Max Air 180s, right? So we don't get the brown scuffs, we don't get the red soles, but we still know that he's wearing the shoes. So did that help? Did that hurt? It depends, right? We have to go back and we have to ask, does it help my story? Does it help my narrative? And if it has nothing to do with the rest of our story, then probably not. So let's keep going. If we change it a little bit, Jimmy always wore blue Nike Vaporfly Max Airs 180s. He pointed them out to everyone. Okay, so now we're starting to get into kind of the why. Why is this in here, right? If it's important to the story, then yeah, we want to tell people specifics like this, the fact that he wore the blue Nikes, right? But it only matters if the story has to do with the fact that he pointed them out to everyone. Maybe you ended up, ruining his shoes, or maybe, I don't know, you stole his shoes. Something, it doesn't really matter what the story is, as long as this detail has to do with the story, that adds something to the story, right? If you're just pointing out the fact that he wore blue Nikes and never mention it again, then it's kind of a pointless detail. Your reader doesn't have to know that, and you end up doing this, right? So another thing you can do is hinting, right? You can use details to hint at something. So Jimmy always wore blue Nike Vaporfly Max Air 180s until that Thursday in March, right? So this might be a good way to start a paper, right? There's an important detail right here because it has to do with the rest of the incident that occurred on that Thursday in March, right? So if I tell you that he wore blue Nikes, it should have something to do with the incident that I'm hinting about, right? I hope that makes sense. You can also use it like this, where there's a separation. Jimmy always wore blue Nikes. The rest of the class wore Adidas. Okay, so now, again, it has to do with the incident that I'm hinting at, right? That Jimmy always wore his blue Nikes and the rest of the class wore Adidas. That's important because obviously it's pointing to the fact that some incident occurred that that has to do with Nikes versus Adidas. It separates Jimmy out. Maybe Jimmy always wears blue Nikes because he's determined to not be like everybody else. Okay, so maybe that is important, and it doesn't have to do with the rest of, we never see the blue Nikes again, but it's the fact that it shows that Jimmy is separate from everybody else, right? So if we go on to say Jimmy, was excluded, or Jimmy was bullied, or whatever, this detail of him wearing blue Nikes and everyone else wearing Adidas, that's important because it shows separation, right? If the fact that the rest of the class wore blue Nikes, or Adidas, and Jimmy wears blue Nikes, if that never comes up again and has no importance to the story, then it has no business being in the paper. You can also use details if they reveal things about the author, right? Jimmy always wore blue Nike Vaporfly Max Air 180s. I wanted my own pair, right, the author, but could never convince my dad to open his wallet, right? So the fact that Jimmy always wears these shoes and that the author kind of covets the shoes, again, maybe this points to, maybe, I don't know, he's at his buddy's Jimmy's house and he ends up taking the shoes and gets in trouble for it, and that's the whole incident. Or maybe it points to the fact that, he grew up, poor, and Jimmy didn't, and so there's some incident that occurs because of that. But it's there for a reason, right? It's not just to say that Jimmy wore these blue Nikes and we never come back to it, okay? So you got to ask yourself, do I need it, right? So you probably don't need Jimmy always wore these blue Nikes. That doesn't really tell us anything. But you might need Jimmy always wore blue Nikes until that Thursday in March, right? Because this, if this is part of our paper, we're most likely talking about the exact incident that occurred on that Thursday in March, and it has to do with these Nike Vaporfly Max. So this is not really needed, right? And this is. So ask yourself, do I need it? Is it important to my story? Why is it important to my story? And if it is important to my story, I should I should tell the reader that by hinting or by showing some separation, and not just drop in the Air Max that never, or the Vaporfly Max Airs that never come up again, right? So let's take a look at some examples from some papers I've already looked at. We walked from the pale hallways to the charcoal black asphalt in the parking lot to ask his mom, who after some hesitation said yes. I like this. We get pale hallways. Maybe we could work in some lighting in here. We walked from the brightly lit, like fluorescent pale hallways to the sun bleached charcoal black asphalt. Right? So we get a transition from inside to outside, right? And this is just a little detail that may never come up again, but it's something that he's able to drop in there that adds to the scene, right? So when we ask ourselves, do I need it? Yes, you do, because it adds to the scene, right? And it adds to the scene without seeming gratuitous, right? It's not like he goes, we walked from the pale hallways where, children's drawings were hanging up, and and there's cracks in the walls, and he just talks about the hallways for a whole sentence, and then has nothing to do with the rest of the story, right? It's just a kind of in passing detail, and those are details that are always kind of useful, especially when setting the scene. An in passing detail is what I think is a good thing to call by. So. Right, I like that name for it just because it's not like it has something to do with the plot or it's really, really important, but we don't dwell on it, right? We don't get stuck on it, which I think, let's see if the next one does that. No. Here, let's look at this one. I was wearing a sweater that was mainly black, but near my chest were small white stripes on the outside of a larger orange stripe and gray sweatpants, right? So I'm not going to give you the whole thing, the whole paper, but taken in context of what the author is talking about, it just doesn't make a lot of sense why there's so much detail to do with this, with what he's wearing, honestly. Where it's talking about a cold exam room, right? And his dad handing him a jacket. So the fact that he's wearing a sweater that is mainly black and has small white stripes on the outside of a larger orange stripe, like, why, there's no reason to give the author those, or the reader those details. It has nothing to do with the rest of the story. Has nothing to do with his dad handing him his jacket so he's not cold. A better way to do this would probably be to say, I was wearing a thin sweater and some gray sweatpants, but the room was so cold, right, that my father ended up giving me his jacket, right? So that highlights the coldness of the room, and then so that's focusing on a different thing and a more important thing to the story than simply all these details about the sweater that never comes up again and doesn't really have a lot to do with the scene. We'll call these red herring details. Okay, so if you know anything about rhetoric and arguments, there's a thing called a red herring, which basically is it's basically throwing out information in the hopes of distracting someone. And I think these details like this are just distracting the reader from the main point and really have nothing to do with the overall paper, right? So yeah, if I say red herring detail, you know what I'm talking about. If I say in passing detail, you know what I'm talking about. Very well then, she sighed, handing them a stack of papers 6 sheets high with coffee stains in the corner. I think this is again an example of an in passing detail. Maybe not, the most. I'm just saying that what it does for the story, right, is it sets the scene again, and it gives us something concrete, right? So she doesn't hand them a stack of papers and then the author doesn't go on to describe, in depth about the papers when the papers have nothing to do with the overall plot of the story. But it does give us some concrete details that make us imagine these papers that are 6 sheets high. If anyone's been to the doctor, they kind of know what this looks like. And then that little detail with coffee stains in the corner, it adds not only more detail, but it makes it seem more realistic, right? Because this is not perfect sheets of paper. This is not, it doesn't seem like the author's making this up, because he has like a little imperfection in this image, and it makes the image more real and more concrete in our brains. So I hope that helped, guys. I think for those I kind of picked on at the end, don't feel bad. This is all, everyone does this, right? And I would just encourage you guys to ask these questions, like, do I need it? What does it do for my story, right? If it adds nothing to the story, you probably don't need it. But then go back through your paper if you find you don't have enough detail and go, okay, well, where do I need it, right? What places in the story need more detail? So that would be the important moments, right? Changes of scene, things that you can really focus in on, lighting, atmosphere, weather, all these things, food. These are things we've talked about in Plainsong and stuff like that. And there's a reason we talk about them, because they help, make things real for the reader. So I hope that helps, guys. Good luck.